Well, I'm going to tee you up here. We've got our exclamation points and question marks that we do every week. This week it's post Rutgers. John, what's your first exclamation point? We're back to 2-1 in favor of the good guys.
Yeah, a big win this week. So back to two things that we were excited about. First thing for me is just the way that they stuck with the ground game after that. It at times felt like it had moments of success, especially in that first half, that second quarter with Jordan Davison in that game against Indiana, and then in this Rutgers game this past Saturday, everybody was getting it done on the ground. Jordan Davison was picking up huge chunks, but you get that first possession that doesn't quite go right. You get behind the sticks, throw a screen pass out there, and after that, they really stuck to the ground game. You end up with 415 yards in total, averaging over 11 yards per carry. 11th most in program history, and it fell out of the top 10 because of kneel downs at the end of the game. So they were just absolutely dominant on the ground, and I really feel like Noah Whittington has kind of come back to being that number one option within this ground game for Oregon. You look at it, and it's 11 attempts for him, just to kind of get that solidified again, is to have a number one guy, where he felt like you had that at the start of the year, but then when he had the injury, even though he was playing this last week or two, he wasn't really fully back. It felt like he looked like the guy we saw at the beginning of the year, breaking those big runs against Oklahoma State again. So really excited about that, obviously. And then Jordan Davison, I think you got those two as a 1-2 punch is looking like one of the best options that this Oregon team has.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talked about before this one was just getting back to the amount of diversity that Oregon had. And it really feels like they did that, especially with the rushing attack, which really got limited against Indiana. It felt like that was back to some semblance of full strength that made against a much weaker rushing defense. I mean, I would win a little bit more broad here. I really appreciate this. This was the type of response that Oregon needed, not necessarily because it won by 46 points and was up 43-3 at halftime, but just like in how comprehensively the Ducks beat the Scarlet Knights here. It felt like this wasn't just a game where the Ducks, and we'll get into this one because it has better athletes. It felt like the Ducks were really on a level where they were out scheming the opponent, which is really what we wanted to see in this game, is because you look at this one, you say, hey, maybe you can't take too much away from it because Kenyon Sadiq is going to be better than whoever he's up against just because it's Rutgers. It felt like, yes, like that was true, but also like guys were open because of the way Will Stein was able to scheme and sequence plays in this game. Was that something you saw?
Definitely. That's the kind of the next point I had, and connecting that back to what I said about the beginning of the game. When I was on Odds and Audibles talking to Eric Scopel last week, one of our little props at the beginning of the game was the amount of message board like hate comments for Will Stein if Oregon went 3-and-out on their first possession, and for Oregon to get into a situation 3rd and 11. This is exactly what Oregon fans hate, is seeing these 3rd and long screen passes to guys like Gary Bryant, who has done very well on those opportunities this year, but he pops it up. I didn't get a chance to go back and look at the message boards, but I'm sure they were not very positive towards Will Stein at that point of the game. So to be able to come back from that, and then immediately after that, everything reset. The offense looked completely clean. Dante Amore executed really very cleanly throughout the rest of the game, and not only was executing well, but then hitting the deep shots, hitting the trick plays that they brought out a couple of times. But Kenyon Sadiq was wide open all night. DeCorian Moore was wide open all night. And to be able to kind of you can see the hunger that this team has, and that Dan Lanning has instilled in them. And that's going to be present throughout the rest of this year, kind of coming off of that loss where things weren't up to the level that they felt like they should have been at, because they talk about every week playing Oregon versus Oregon. I don't think they felt like they beat Oregon in that Indiana game. I think they feel like they beat Oregon in that Rutgers game, and that's the way you want to continue to play throughout the rest of this year. Can set the standard and continue to kind of meet it throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that really gets to that point. And in terms of players looking like themselves again, Oregon looked like itself again in this game. So did Dante Moore. He only threw 20 passes, was 15 of 20 in this game. 290 yards, 4 touchdowns. There's the pick at the end that we'll talk about. I really felt like he looked like himself in this game. And a big part of that was because he was upright the whole time. Definitely no sacks. I can't remember a pressure. And it was the fact that when the pocket did, start collapsing a little bit, he would step up and stick with his reads. It was that Indiana game where he, would move off reads really quickly because he felt pressure and because he was getting sacked so early and so often. And that looked like it really had gone away in this game. I was really encouraged to see that.
Yeah, Rutgers wasn't going to do as many things to change that pre-snap and post-snap look for Dante, as Indiana was doing in that game, which is really what was complicating things, making him see things that weren't happening out there. But I was really impressed by the way that it just looked like he was confident in his reads, and it felt like every time he was hitting the back of his drop and able to just fire the ball out and attack downfield on plays like the touchdown to Decorium Moore on a dagger route. It was a phenomenal game from Dante. The fact that all 3 touchdowns early came from over 20 yards out, and then he hits the last one to Whittington out of the backfield. But you could see that the arm coming out again in this one as they were stretching things out vertically, hitting those seam routes to Sadiq and such.
Yeah, and I mean, and your concern with the young quarterback is that, hey, like he does have a bad game and he's not able to rebound from it. I think this is proof that Dante really is able to reset, and that's something that you get from him being able to sit with so many guys who have so much experience, like Dylan, who shout out to him, got his first NFL win this weekend in a kind of a crazy game, crazy weather, but to see Dante just be able to so quickly come back like that is really encouraging to me.
Yeah. All right. Now, Owen, I want to hear where the question marks lie for you after this game. Well, what is something that's still, you're leaving in doubt a little bit, because Oregon played looks like a great game, but this is a Rutgers team that has struggled, especially on the defensive side of football this year.
Yeah, I mean, and where I really wanted to go with this was just, how much, we already answered this question a little bit, but just how much of this was because Oregon had better athletes, how much of this was because Noah Whittington is faster than anybody that Rutgers can leave to chase him, and how many of these explosive plays, because I think the Ducks had 15 by the end of the game, were yes, well schemed plays that got guys open, but they, that's a 5-yard play or a 7-yard play against Indiana, against Ohio State. That's really, there is still a level to which you come out of this game saying, okay, now I want to see it against a great team. And the Ducks, probably won't see a great college football playoff caliber team until the postseason.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, because that's also kind of where the question mark lies with me here, is just where does this team meet resistance throughout the rest of the year? Because now we'll talk about it a little later. I think USC is still a good team. They lose that game to Notre Dame this weekend and fall out of the rankings. So now still no one left ranked on the rest of the schedule. But gosh, man, this Oregon is going to be so much better than a lot of these teams throughout the rest of the year. It feels like, where are they going to find those moments to show that they did learn things from those Indiana games and show that they have improved, and not just, like you said, being better athletes, being so much better prepared for this game than that Rutgers seemed to be last weekend. We're going to have to see it throughout the rest of the year, because right now I'm not sure where that's going to come. I think USC is still the time for that. But it's going to be a game in front of this Autzen crowd in November. USC is going to be coming up. The weather's probably not going to be as nice as it is in Southern California for them. So that might not be the situation where Oregon's really tested physically like they are going to be by these other teams once it comes postseason time in December and January.
Absolutely. Well, it certainly doesn't seem like Wisconsin is going to be that level of test. It didn't look like Rutgers was either. We're going to just take a little bit of time now that we've really been able to take a look at it and really see what went right for the Ducks. John, what did go right? I know we've got a couple points here laid out.
Yeah, so Oregon was just so much better than Rutgers in the trenches that it just set the standard for the game, and that Rutgers wasn't going to be able to do anything. Like you mentioned, the O-line really clean throughout that entire game. Dante only credited with he only was pressured 3 times in that one per PFF, but all 3 of those were not ones credited to the O-line. So everyone was doing really solid. And obviously, when you're watching, you can see that these guys, the Rutgers defensive linemen, really just can't go anywhere. You can't move Isaiah World and Alex Harkey the way that some of these Indiana guys were. So the offensive line was really good. Rushing lanes were huge all night, and you could see that, especially like the Davison run up the middle. That he got about like 60 or almost 70 yards on, just a duo call, and it's just perfectly blocked, working a combo between Poncho and Iuli and getting to the second level. Huge hole up the middle for him. And then the defensive line was also awesome in this game. I thought this was Tatum Tuioti, maybe his best game I've seen from him, especially as a pass rusher. That the speed rush he had to get that strip sack on Calic Manis, I think is maybe the best individual play I've seen of his career. That was awesome. I just love to continue to see him develop and get better every game, because the combo of him and Mateo Uiagalelei is one of the better edge rusher duos at this point that anybody's going to see around the country.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And while we're talking about the offensive line, I want to get in a little bit, because there was a discussion about a potential change there and pushing Harkey inside and bringing out somebody, maybe I think it was Janoris Wilson in at right tackle. That wasn't how the Ducks started the game, but they did do that, in the second half when there certainly wasn't anything at stake. Is that something that you're curious about going forward? Do you feel pretty good about Harkey at right tackle, in this game and then also going forward?
I thought he played solid for sure at right tackle. I think part of that is just you have an opportunity to do that in this kind of Rutgers game and just experiment a little bit and see if that might be the better option. I'd have to dive into the film on those two guys and see how they played in those different spots. But from what I saw from the initial viewing, everything seemed clean for me in terms of operation. And Harkey is a guy that fits very well at a guard. I think he'll be a guard at the next level because he has that kind of just mauler attitude in the middle. I think he would be very solid there just because he can move people well in the run game, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to start talking about just a little bit about the secondary. We had hyped up the Rutgers receiving core. Honestly, you brought up the stat they're 1-2 in contested catch rate, and the Ducks really shut them down on night. I know there was an injury there that maybe limited them, but you still feel like this is another strong point for Ducks secondary that really just feels like it keeps getting better.
I mean, you just look at the overall numbers for Calic Manis in this game, and the fact that he's completing less than half of his passes. He's under 100 yards in this game, a couple of picks. Early on, they were trying to hit those shots down the sideline, or early on, Oregon was able to establish that those weren't going to work. I think almost all of the defensive backs had a PBU in that game, and I pulled the numbers specifically on the contested catches for Rutgers. They went 3 for 9. Duff, the big 6'6" receiver, had one of them, and then they had one in the slot that they credited, which just isn't the same scenario as what Rutgers has been trying to do all year with these big guys on the outside. Like you mentioned, Ian Strong did go down at one point. He came back into the game, but he just seemed a little limited after that. I think he only had 1 or 2 targets in the game. I don't even know if he had a catch. It took away another option, one of the main 2 options there for Rutgers. So, yeah. But overall, yeah, this cornerback room, I was impressed to see too, Naeem Offord getting some run there, just because I think he ended up leading the group in snaps overall.
Really?
Because, let me pull up the PFF real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed, and especially Aaron Flowers too, who had one of the interceptions. Yeah. He's been a guy who's really grown, just in terms of role, and he's another guy who you felt like has learned from a guy that knows a lot.
Offord was
getting to play next to Dylan Thieneman. Go ahead with Offord.
Yeah, he was 35 snaps. Finney was second in the corners with 34. So It's just not. They didn't challenge him a ton, and he got a lot of run throughout that second half. But I just like to see him getting an opportunity to get that experience out there as well. So especially as he had kind of fallen out of the rotation a little bit as things condensed and things got more serious against Penn State and Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like we've been like poking around it all season, but this is just really one of the groups that's done a great job coming together. We heard a great story. I think it was Flowers, right? No, it was Finney who's sitting with Thieneman.
Poncho was the one who told that story.
Poncho's story.
Yeah,
he's just sitting with Thieneman at the lunch table and just talking to him, and looking at stuff with him. There was one. Gosh, I think it was from post Rutgers where he's just talking about Finney just being the guy who's sitting in the film room every day. Mm-hmm. He'll find him there at 11 p.m. Watching the defensive line tape. This is just a unit that. These are great individual athletes, and they found a great way to come together, and I've been really impressed by it.
Yeah, I've been talking to Thieneman all year about how he is a leader for this group, and you can see a lot of these guys do look up to him. But it's also cool to see. Like I was putting together a story about Finney last week, and we knew we were getting Poncho in the interviews, and Poncho is a guy who everybody else on the team points to him as one of the biggest leaders. So I wanted to hear from him how he sees, a young guy in Brandon Finney, who has stepped up so early in his career. And like Dan said, he's really been a guy who leads by example. Finney talked about his process, and that is things like he is the guy who's putting that extra time in the film room. He's one of those guys who's out there extra time after practice to just, catch some balls from the jugs machine and just work on parts of his game, work on his footwork on the ladders and stuff like that. He's putting in all he's doing, and like you said, eating with Thieneman. Poncho's like, yeah, every time I'm in the cafeteria, I see Finney there talking to Thieneman at breakfast, lunch, dinner, picking his brain, asking him because he knows that Thieneman is a guy who has done this at some of the highest levels in college football, and he recognizes that and wants to, imitate those things that have gotten him there. So I think that's just really impressive and mature to see from such a young guy and a true freshman. And you've seen that throughout this year. When we talked to DeCorian Moore, you could tell that he was a guy who is very mature and is able to handle things beyond his years. And I'm excited to see if we hopefully get to talk to these freshman running backs at some point, because the impact that these guys on both sides of the ball have made on this team at their age, so exciting to think about the future of this program, knowing they're going to be around for a couple more years.
Yeah. The last thing I really want to touch on from this Rutgers game was just like the level to which Oregon beat the Scarlet Knights with scheme. There's that 3-play sequence. I think Coach Dan Casey posted it. That's been going around that was really the flash, but it felt like all night, like you had mentioned. The receivers are just like they're not. Yes, they're open because DeCorian Moore ran a sweet double move, and split safety, but they're also open because it's a great route concept. Where'd you see the balance there?
Yeah, like you said, that the 3-play sequence is one that obviously stands out when you're looking at a fake flip to Dante Moore coming from a receiver position. Then you go polecat, and then it's a flea flicker. That's just a Will Stein in his bag type of sequencing. But throughout the night, I like the way that Oregon. It didn't feel like so early as much. Again, I'll have a Will Stein article at some point this week once I fully chart out all the offensive plays. But it felt like early on they maybe didn't try to establish the ground as much, but as they got into that one in the second quarter, the third quarter, they were just running their regular concepts on the ground, their counters that they like, the duo stuff, and just picking up 6 to 7 yards on all of these carries, running everything, just the scheme very efficiently. So they were able to, and then when you do that, then you could set Dante Moore up in these opportunities to take the shots downfield where you're in second and short, third and short. You feel more comfortable. If you don't get it, then you can, have an opportunity to convert later on.